Hello and welcome to What the Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditis. Let's get to it. It's Thursday, November 5th, 2020. Welcome to day 1386. Okay, so this was recorded at 7:45 Eastern Time, so this may very well be out of date by the time you hear it, but here we go. As of now, there has been no conclusion to the U.S. presidential election. Again, so far. Biden is currently leading in several undecided states, but votes continue to be counted in Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. Biden remains 6 electoral votes away from the 270 mark that would make him president. Trump's campaign has pushed officials in Arizona to ensure all ballots were counted, but has sued in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia to stop the counts. Biden has urged Americans to stay calm and has reiterated that every vote must be counted. While Trump, on the other hand, after a 14-hour Twitter silence, tweeted that states must, quote, stop the count, end quote, in all caps. And at a press conference later in the day, he repeated his false declaration that he won the election, falsely claimed that, quote, they, end quote, are trying to steal the election. And of course, oh, by the way, the U.S. reported more than 100,000 new coronavirus cases in a single day for the first time. Trump demanded that vote counting be stopped in states where he's leading and demanded that the tallies continue where he's losing. In a pair of all-caps tweets, he made multiple false claims about the remaining ballots left to be counted and contradicted his own campaign strategy, saying, quote, stop the count, end quote, followed by, quote, any vote that came in after Election Day will not be counted, end quote. Again, these are all in all caps. A number of states, including Pennsylvania, do allow ballots to arrive for days after the election, as long as they are postmarked by Election Day. Ballots often take longer to arrive from service members deployed overseas, and election officials have pledged to count every valid vote. In Arizona, the Trump campaign sent a team to ensure that the remaining mail-in ballots are counted. Campaign manager Bill Stepien said the team believes the ballots will favor Trump and eventually flip the state back to his column. The Associated Press and Fox News have both called Arizona for Biden. Biden currently leads by about 60,000 votes. The state plans to release another round of counts around 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign filed lawsuits in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia seeking to stop the counting or disqualify ballots, saying it would demand a recount in Wisconsin. A judge in Georgia, however, denied Trump's effort to disqualify ballots that a Republican poll watcher claimed had arrived after the deadline on Election Day. In court, the poll watcher offered no evidence that the ballots had arrived late, and county election officials had testified that they had arrived on time. In Michigan, a judge denied the Trump campaign's request to stop the counting of votes, saying the request made little sense since counting had essentially finished and Biden was already ahead by 150,000 votes. Trump's lead in Georgia, meanwhile, has slipped to about 36,000 votes, with roughly 42,000 ballots left to be counted. In Pennsylvania, Trump's lead has dropped to less than 65,000 votes and is expected to shrink as more ballots are counted. The Pennsylvania Secretary of State said it was possible that they would know the state's presidential winner tonight. Meanwhile, in Nevada, the Trump campaign said it was filing a lawsuit seeking to block alleged illegal votes from thousands of people, including those who became non-residents during the coronavirus pandemic, as well as, quote, dead voters, end quote. At a news conference in the Clark County Elections Department headquarters, former Nevada Attorney General Adam Laxalt and other Trump campaign surrogates, including former administration official Richard Grenell, claimed without any supporting evidence that ballots belonging to deceased people had already been counted, and that thousands of people had voted despite moving out of the county. When pressed for evidence about those alleged illegal ballots, Grenell refused to answer questions and chided reporters for asking questions, saying, quote, "Listen, you're getting information. Do your job. It's pretty easy," end quote. Biden is currently leading Trump by about 11,438 votes, with 190,000 ballots left to be counted, roughly 90% of which are from Clark County. Trump, meanwhile, falsely declared victory once again and repeated his baseless claim that, quote, "If you count the legal votes, I easily win," end quote. Of course, there is no evidence to support the claims, and Trump did not provide any evidence to do so. Nevertheless, he added, quote, "If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us," end quote. Trump spoke for 17 minutes and did not take any questions. ABC, CBS, and MSNBC all stopped broadcasting Trump's remarks. Biden, meanwhile, says he has no doubt that his campaign won the election, but urged Americans to stay calm while the remaining votes are counted. Quote, "Each ballot must be counted, and that's what we're going through now," Biden. Biden said. "Democracy is sometimes messy. It sometimes requires a little patience as well," end quote. Biden added, quote, "Stay calm. The process is working. The count is being completed, and we'll know very soon," end quote. Meanwhile, more than 150,000 ballots were not processed and delivered on Election Day by the U.S. Postal Service. The number of mailed ballots not delivered by Election Day is expected to grow as more data is released over the coming days. An international delegation monitoring the U.S. election said there is no evidence to support Trump's allegations of mail-in voter fraud. Michael Link, a German lawmaker who heads an observer mission of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, said, quote, "We couldn't see any violations," end quote, and said that he was, quote, "very surprised," end quote, by Trump's claims about fraud. Wisconsin officials, meanwhile, rejected the Trump campaign's unsubstantiated claims that there were irregularities in the voting process, reassuring voters that there are, quote, "no dark corners or locked doors in elections," end quote, and that the state's voting process was transparent. The Biden campaign characterized the Trump campaign's call for a recount in Wisconsin as pathetic, and said it was a fruitless attempt, pointing out that when Trump won Wisconsin by fewer than 23,000 votes in 2016, he called the victory a landslide. Meanwhile, the Justice Department told federal prosecutors that the law allowed them to send armed federal officers to polling locations to investigate potential voter fraud. While a law prohibits stationing armed federal officers at polls on Election Day, the department interpreted the statute to mean that they could send armed federal officers to locations where ballots were being counted any time after that. The memo was sent early Wednesday as the polls closed. Meanwhile, the control of the Senate hinges on Georgia, where at least one and possibly both of the Senate's state races will go to a January runoff. Under Georgia law, if no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, the two top vote-getters compete in a runoff election to be held on January 5, 2021. Incumbent Republican Senator David Perdue was at 49.98%, with about 47,000 ballots still to be counted. If that number holds, he would face off against Democrat Jon Ossoff. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler is already headed to a runoff against Democrat Raphael Warnock. And finally, the United States reported 102,831 new coronavirus cases in a single day for the first time, breaking the previous record, which was set last week. Over the past 7 days, the United States has averaged about 85,000 new cases per day, a 20% increase from the week before, and 23 states have recorded more cases in the past week than they have in any other 7-day stretch since the pandemic began. COVID-19 hospitalizations, meanwhile, have reached all-time highs in 16 states, and at least 1,097 deaths were reported on Wednesday.
That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website,
And as always, visit whatthefuckjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.